So, Monica, give us a sense of the president's mindset going into this meeting and how the White House is setting expectations.
Well, the stakes are incredibly high, Chris, but the expectations are a little bit lower. They're not anticipating a big or major breakthrough from these talks. But the president yesterday really gave us his clearest view of how he's approaching President Putin, someone he did meet a decade ago under very different circumstances when he was vice president and when Putin was prime minister of Russia. But tomorrow, when they meet overlooking Lake Geneva just behind me for multiple hours, they will be in two different sessions, a smaller one and then an expanded bilateral session. We don't know exactly how long it's going to last, but we do know the president says he is prepared to confront Putin on a number of issues, including, of course, cybersecurity and ransomware attacks, issues with Americans detained in Russia, human rights abuses, and a long list. Unclear whether he's going to be able to get to all of them, but we do know how he is assessing Vladimir Putin, giving us a little bit of insight in terms of how he views him as a character when he was at NATO yesterday. Take a listen to how he framed it.
It's in our mutual interest, in the interest of the world, to cooperate and see if we can do that. And the areas where we don't agree, make it clear what the red lines are. I have met with him. He's bright. He's tough. And I have found that he is as they say, when he used to play ball, a worthy adversary.
The president says in terms of areas of potential cooperation, they will be talking about climate change, arms control, containing Iran's nuclear ambitions, and a whole nother list of things. So we expect the president, though, to come out by himself after this summit wraps up and hold his own press conference, with the White House deciding that by design they don't want to give President Putin the same image that former President Trump had in Helsinki all of those years ago, instead deciding they want this president to be able to be frank about all of the issues he confronted Putin on and talk about that, which we expect to hear from President Putin as well individually. And then, of course, we'll compare the two sides because Putin is known to sometimes exaggerate and misrepresent the facts. But the president will be making his way to Geneva here shortly, Chris, and we know he has been extensively preparing for several weeks, holding a session at the White House before he departed for Europe with a group of about 10 experts on Russia, including, of course, those who have met with and been present for several meetings with Putin over the last decade or so. Chris?
All right, Ambassador, you're one of the folks that she just referenced, so we're really fortunate to have you today. Not only have you interacted with Vladimir Putin in the past, you were there when Biden met with him 10 years ago. So when you briefed the president, what can you tell us? What did you tell him about what to expect from Vladimir Putin?
Well, I'm not going to comment on my private conversations with President Biden, but I have briefed the vice president before that meeting 10 years ago, and I've spoken many times with his other senior government officials about what to expect. And I think there are several things that are different about Mr. Putin. First of all, he loves to play this whataboutism game, comparing things that are not equivalent. Two, he can sometimes roll out surprises. Remember, he did that with President Trump in Helsinki in 2018, when in front of all the cameras, he said that we should swap potential criminals in both countries. As you'll recall, Mr. Mueller had just indicted a dozen Russian intelligence officers right before that summit. And Putin said, well, we have some people that we think have broken Russian law. We would like to interrogate them as well. And I remember that very well because I was on that list. And President Trump did not know how to respond well. So those are the two kind of tactical things that we discussed 10 years ago that Vice President needs to be prepared for, as well as in his meeting here in just a few hours. So a few days, I guess. We're a few days to go.
Yeah, the big lead up till tomorrow. So, Keir, we know that the White House has been watching your interview with Vladimir Putin very closely. We heard President Biden say Putin is a worthy adversary yesterday when he had that press conference. So after spending time with the Russian president, do you think he feels the same way about President Biden?
You know, Chris, I think that is a challenging question to answer. We do know from my interview with President Putin what he said. He praised if you like, President Biden's long experience. We don't know what President Putin is doing inside the Kremlin there to prepare for the summit. It's possible that he is studying hard. It's possible that after 20 years of leading Russia, he feels confident enough not to. We know what President Putin has said cynically about America in the past. He has talked about the fact that American presidents change while Washington doesn't change. So I think President Biden needs to prepare for a cynical view from President Putin. And we've said before that it may be that they have to tackle individual issues rather than to try and solve the entire relationship. Clearly, they are not going to be able to do that, Chris.
Yeah, and one of the things, obviously, is all the issues that are so critical, Ambassador, from cyber attacks to the crackdown on the opposition, including Alexei Navalny and his followers. And I'm very curious about what you think sort of the mood will be in there. Keir has spoken in the last couple of days after interviewing Putin about sort of his tactics that make you think about him as the former KGB agent. Is he studying for this? Obviously, he's got to approach this differently than he did with Donald Trump. And what would you expect from him in terms of sort of his strategy?
Well, remember, Vladimir Putin doesn't need to get anything out of this meeting. Back when I worked in the State Department and the White House, we used to use the word deliverables for these summits. What are the deliverables, the outcomes that will lead to tangible benefit for the American people? Vladimir Putin doesn't have to have any deliverables other than just showing up. Remember, he didn't request this meeting. President Biden did. And then I think rebutting the long list that you just outlined. And he's really good at that. Let's be clear. He knows that list well. He knows how to respond. And if the outcome was no outcome, no deliverables, that's just fine for Mr. Putin.
So does anything on that list make him nervous? I was listening to you talk to Nicole Wallace yesterday, and you talked about Alexei Navalny, and maybe that's Putin's biggest fear. What does he look at and see as his challenge if it's not this meeting with Joe Biden?
Well, without question, in my view, his greatest challenge is holding on to power. He's slipping in the polls. He's been there for 21 years. Remember, anybody would slip in the polls after 21 years. His chief opponent is Alexei Navalny, and he's in jail as a result of that. And remember, Alexei Navalny is not talking about abstract things like liberalism and democracy. He's talking about anti-corruption. That is Putin's Achilles heel, and that's what he fears the most.
Here we've learned that President Biden is expected also to bring up ties between Russia and China. A senior official told Politico that the U.S. now says it is, quote, a quasi-alliance. What can you tell us about that partnership and what it could mean for the United States?
Well, I think it's a really important question. Long term, probably the most important question. The relationship between China and Russia has been improving since back in the days of Gorbachev and Yeltsin. So this is a long-term arc, if you like. I think it's important to register that there are divisions, there are issues. Just for example, China abstained on the Crimea vote at the Security Council. The big Chinese banks have been careful not to contravene US sanctions against Russia. So there is a gap. Now, what President Putin said to me was that he's seeing people trying to tear the two countries apart, and he's determined not to see that happen. Having said that, and I would be really interested to hear what Ambassador McFaul thinks about this, I think the long-term strategic challenge for the US is to how do you deal with that growing alliance between China and Russia, because their power combined, I think, is the greatest threat in the long term.
What's your take on that, Ambassador?
Well, I agree. They have become, Russia and China are closer today than probably any time in their history. There was a brief honeymoon period after Mr. Mao took over in the Communist Revolution. But after that, there was a split back in the Cold War days. Remember that. The Sino-Soviet split took place very early on. Today, they're close. And I think they'll be close for a long time to come because Putin doesn't have any other options. However, I do think it's dangerous for the United States and the Biden administration to think that somehow they're going to peel off Putin away from China as a balance of power tactics, thinking about what Nixon did during the Cold War. That will not work. because Putin's not going to trust an erratic democratic country like the United States of America versus autocratic China. And number two, so what? What would the United States gain out of that split? So I think there is this kind of talk. We need to divide these countries. I disagree. I think President Biden has the right frame, which is we are in an era of a competition between autocracies and democracies. And I think he's right to try to strengthen the ties between the democracies.